Welcome. This is my approach to determining schedule contingency post-feed, meaning we're in detailed design and or construction. And so what we're modeling here is the uncertainty residing within the man-hour estimate. Now before we start, just 4 basic ground rules. And one is we have to start from a well-crafted schedule. There's just absolutely no reason to do this if you've got a flawed schedule. So you know what the metrics are, but primarily it's only 2 open ends, meaning a finish and a start, no negative float, and no hard constraints, no finish-ons, no starts-on. And the durations have to be determined from a good quality Class 3 estimate or better. So our man-hours have to be determined from a reasoned examination of the project work. And thirdly, this is the cooperative effort. You're going to need everybody on the team helping you do this. You're going to need information from them. And if they're not going to help you, you're not going to get that information. So what this usually means is it's going to take 2 to 3 times as long to do this as you think. So budget accordingly. So the difference here is we have events and factors. And an event is a risk element that may or may not happen. It's the hurricanes or the strikes or the permits. And this generally comes out of or generally accounted for in the risk register. Now this becomes important in pre-feed or in pre-project planning when we're really trying to put together a basic understanding of our project. Now once we're in post-feed, once we're in detailed design, then what we're after are risk factors. And these are essentially relates to productivity, and it's almost always dealing with man hours. So it's whatever is affecting the man hours. It could be the climate, it could be the altitude, it could be a number of different things that the estimator may or may not have accounted for. Now he's going to tell you what he thinks these are. And again, it could be resource shortages, it could be the quality of the people, any number of different things that he thinks is going to have an impact on the ultimate productivity, meaning they may do better or worse than he anticipated, and he will tell you what those are, and we'll get to those later. But it's just basically understand the difference here is we're dealing with risk factors, not risk events. So just a little background here. The first way to deal with uncertainty was the old PERT diagram. And essentially that was just our duration would be the optimistic plus 4 times the expected or the likely value plus the pessimistic. And then you divide that by 6. And that's going to give you a rough idea. And the only trouble with that is it doesn't account for stoichiometric understanding of things, in other words, the ranges. But this is just kind of a background. This is what we had for the longest time until we had Monte Carlo simulation. Okay, so here's a couple of definitions that I'm using. I hope you find them acceptable. And for us, uncertainty is the range of possible durations an activity may need. And that means that, let's assume that the estimator budgeted 10 hours to do something, but he knew it could take as little as 8 or could take as many as 15. And he knows that somewhere, and again, these ranges for the most part, or we'll get to them later, deal with craft ranges. But when we do with small projects, small schedules, we'll probably be dealing with discrete elements. We're going to look at a single activity and then talk to whoever owns that activity to get their understanding. So this is contingency here for me is the additional time or monies we're going to need it to achieve the stated objectives for the project. So we go in and we do our best determination, we do our Class 3 estimate or better, and we build our schedule for that. And so we now have a deterministic date, and we also have a time variable estimate that we need that has some variability, and we have to account for that variability. So we always need the 3-point estimates, and if we don't do it right here, it's just never going to matter. So I would offer that we want to have 3 different ways of doing this, and these breakdowns are arbitrary. They work for me, and I belong to the club that says, hey, our schedule should not be any greater than 3,000 activities. So we start out on our small project, say 100 to 300 activities. That's direct determination. That's where we sit down and we talk to whoever owns the activity. And for the most part, these are unrelated, meaning they're independent in the sense that they're not performed by the same person. Now, when we get a little larger and we have to about 1,000 activities, it could be a mix, and it depends on the state of the estimate, like it says there. And it may or may not be a class 3. When we get to above 1,000 and we're now dealing with unit rates, and in my mind, whatever unit rate he used for a pipe fitter is going to be the same for all pipe fitters. And so I'm saying that productivity now is 100% correlated. Now, the important thing to remember here is that you want to stay away from extremes. And so when you're talking to the people, when you're trying to do the direct determination, or when you're talking to the estimator, try to limit him to only talking about the P10 or the P90. And what this means is that under any circumstances, we can have events that are so rare that they just don't need to be considered, and in fact they will just cause undue concern. And we talk about that, but just if you know what a P10 and a P90 is, fine. So this is what we do for a small project. And so what you want to do is look at the blue line there, the engineering relation start. And what happened here is the engineering manager says that I can usually do this, I can design this pipeline in 125 days. Could do it in as little as 90 days, or it could take me as long as 150. Now, what's interesting here is this kind of violates the norm. Because if you notice, there's the delta is on the low end is 35 days, and on the high end it's only 25 days. That's usually not the way it is. So my guess is here's the engineering manager is has skewed his curve, and he skewed it the wrong way. But doesn't matter. This is what we've got. This is what we have to go with. So when a little larger project, the mid-range project, what I do here is I develop a risk code. And what this means to me is when I sit down with whoever owns that particular activity, say like develop the project execution plan. When I sit down with the project manager, and he says that it's going to be a minus 20 plus 50. So that's where the 2050 comes in. So he's going to do it for either 80% or 150%. And so it's very simple. It's a simple code. You may or may not use it. It doesn't matter. But again, it's an attempt to simplify the whole thing and to put it out there. And it's just an easier way to talk to, in this particular case, like the project manager. And again, it's easy for him to say these percentages, if you notice, they repeat. And so it just makes it a little bit easier to do. And again, the nice thing about that is we can change these the remaining durations or whatever, and it doesn't really change. We don't have to go back in and do the discrete changes. And here's the last one. This is the large project. And if you notice, the risk code here is like PD and MD and EL. And what that stands for is piping design, mechanical design, and electrical design. Not terribly important here, but you'll see when it becomes important when we do the template risk. But again, each one of those, that the risk code says that everything within piping design is going to have the same unit rate and is going to be affected by the same productivity factors. And so it becomes 100% correlated. Now, this is what happens now on the bigger schedules when we do have the templated risk. So these are, for me, are the 3 primary risk distribution. And the first is the triangle. That's the one that is pretty much the default. And the interesting thing to note there is the extremes are truncated. And so it tends to more normalize the data. Now, beta PERT is something they found that seems to be a fair approximation of what happens. And so this is why I mentioned before on the engineering, it kind of violates the normal understanding of what's going to happen to an activity. He was much more skewed to the left than it should. Generally, we're looking at right skewed triangles here for distributions. But beta PERT is supposed to be close to what's going to happen. And it also generally ignores the extremes, which is kind of good. And I use this when I feel like I'm getting a very pessimistic understanding. In other words, they think it's going to take far longer than it really is, and it just kind of tends to bring it back. And conversely, trigen is what I use when they're overly optimistic, because I'm now picking up the endpoints. And generally speaking, we're almost always right skewed, so that by picking up the endpoints, we're picking up a bigger extreme. And this is what I use. There's at least a dozen different distributions that are available within PERT. Now, you're free to use them all, but you'll be coming pretty close to this. Okay, now here's our risk template, and I'm showing you two of them here just for illustrative purposes. But you can see the 1050, and so the minimum is 10% of 100, so 90%, and it's 150, so it's it's 50% more, so it's 150. And you can see that for all of those. Now, the difference here is like on the what we had before with the PD, MD, and LE, is we give them the particular values here. And so I'm saying that for piping, we can expect maybe a 15% improvement or a 40% degradation. Now, what you want to notice here is I show everything that's going to use everything in piping design is 100% correlated. They're all going to move together. So for whatever reason we do better or worse, they all move according to that. And what this, I don't know that this is universally accepted, the correlation. I don't know how else to determine it. If you have a better way, I'd really like to hear about it. But this just gives you the risk template. And what nice thing about this is that we can change any of our duration, and we don't have to go back in and change our mins and our maxes. This does it for us. And so I really suggest that you use the risk template, especially on the bigger schedules. Okay, now we've worked our magic. I've showed you how to do this in other videos, so I won't do that again. But this is what our histogram looks like. And so we basically say that we've got approximately a 12% chance of making our deterministic date. That looks like about the 30th of May. And we have a 90% chance of making the 9th of July. And 50% making the 17th of June. I'm not telling you anything you can't read from the graph. It's just that this is how it came out in this particular case. Nothing particularly magical here, except we now have data. And from this data, we can now calculate a couple of different things. And this is one of them. Because as we know, with a resource loaded schedule, the longer it takes, the more it's going to cost. And this is true of any project. That's the purpose of resource loading this, so we get these costs. And so this is what this is showing. This is our cost growth. And I won't spend too much time here because I've got another graph that's going to show that just a little bit better. And that's what this is. And this is the composite chart, and it shows you our finish dates and our potential costs. And so it looks like we're going to get about $80,000 in additional cost. We could have. Belay that. The deterministic cost was $845,000, and it could go up to $927,000. So this is just something that we're going to show. This is what you would want to go then to your management and say, hey, we better have this in the bank, just in case. And that is the reason for doing this is so that he can account for that. And he's got that extra $800,000 or $80,000 there. And he's basically warned everybody that we could be as late as the first week in July. So if we have if we have a market for our product and we have a contractually obligated delivery date, we'll want to make sure that it's sometime after the 9th of July, just to play safe, or at least to find some alternative means if we don't have it. But this again is just information. This is power. All this is just, it shows you what happens with the distribution at an 80%. And I did 80% cost and schedule. You can play with that, and this is what your management may want to do, just to see what the impact is. So these are the results. To kind of just discuss them, but essentially it's going to take us 33 days longer, and it's probably going to cost us about $65,000 more. And actually this is in millions, so we're talking a lot of money. But this is what they would want to have, given the information that we had from the estimate and the doubts that the estimator had about his unit rates. So in summary, this is the recommendation I want to leave you with. And the first is, don't even bother if your schedule's not any good. So be sure to do a good analysis of that and make sure that it meets the primary VCMA criteria, or whatever criteria you have. And it has to be resource loaded, because what we're after here is time variable cost. So we don't want to lose sight of that. And then the next time is give yourself enough time to do it right. And the primary reason for that is especially on the smaller schedules, you want to sit down with the individual owners of those activities to get their best insights, to get a better view of whatever risks they see out there, and to make sure that those risks are addressed in the risk register so that somebody is monitoring those. But again, our primary function here is looking at duration uncertainty as a result of misestimation of the unit rate. So this is something I would suggest that you do at every schedule change or update or reissue. You rerun this exercise. And that means that you go back and you talk to them and say, has anything changed? Generally it won't, but it doesn't hurt to ask. This is another thing, a little hobby horse I have. Make sure you use some kind of earned value system to measure progress, so that it's difficult for people to game the system, to claim more credit than is due. And that's only because, again, when we run this again, we want to make sure that our remaining durations are as accurate as possible. And here's another thing, just to leave it, understand that contingency is time sensitive. That means that as we progress through, as the project matures, we'll have fewer and fewer risk influences. And so if we haven't used up our contingency, we'll want to return that to the program management office, because they can use that money for other projects. So I hope this helps. Again, this is just this is an overview. This is really something for your project manager to see, or you can show him, just to show you what needs to be done, and that there's different approaches, and it depends on project maturity, which is really reflected in the quality of the schedules, generally the size of the schedules. And this particular approach is intended for post-fee, meaning really the mid-range or the large projects. So we're in detailed design and or construction, and we're probably at least at 500 activities, if not 1,000, but certainly no more than 3,000. So I hope this helps. If any questions, give me a call. Send me an email. Thank you.